by each and every other one. A kingdom like that for Kant would be one in which no one is, again, to make it simple, in West Texas, in which no one uses anybody. Nobody gets used. And that's how Kant wraps up what I consider a fascinating and one of the most important moral accounts of this period of philosophy, is that the last goal is to reach a situation where we could live in a kingdom of ends. By the way, he says that it would be one of perpetual peace. That, of course, as we know, we're still waiting on because there's another new order coming. Okay, I'm not going to have time to do as much as I wanted to do because I did more with Kant than I intended to do. Let me contrast Kant's morality, which today goes under the name of deontology, namely morality that, you know, is about these fundamental rules, rule-governed morality, versus a morality that all of you will be familiar with, so it will require a very short explanation. It's Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill's moral principle, and I'm going to give you Mill's version of it, and it's called utilitarianism. And Americans ought to know all about this. It's in Star Trek movies. It's all over the place. And so I'll give you the utilitarian principle, and I can do it quickly because it is based on hedonism, but it is not based on individual hedonism, but on social hedonism. I'll try to explain that. You'll understand it once I read the principle. And you already know it, I think. We should always act so as to bring the greatest happiness to the greatest number. Now, there's one rule on the one side. On the other, we should, the categorical imperative says we should always act so that the rule of our action could be willed by us to be universal. And on the other side, the principle that we should always act to bring the greatest happiness to the greatest number. For Mill and Bentham, it's clear that happiness is the greatest good. It's clear. And they give a kind of empirical argument for it, even though that's not elegant philosophically. They say, we know happiness is good because that's what people go after, so it's good. It's kind of simple-minded, but that's what led Nietzsche to say that Mill was a blockhead. I mean, but anyway, in fact, Nietzsche went further. He said, human beings don't want happiness, only the English want that. Okay. So the good here is happiness. That's why it's sometimes referred to as the greater happiness principle. And calculation is no problem here. You may go, well, you couldn't be a utilitarian because you couldn't calculate. But in fact, the utilitarian response to that is flat-footed and rather, you know, smart. And that's that you do it all the time. Every time you buy a car, every time you risk driving anywhere, you're out calculating. Easier to get to the airport by car or easier to get Maud to drive me? Easier to go here to do that? Better to go to Yale and to Harvard? So you may say in objection to this theory you can't do it, but you do it all the time. You make utilitarian calculations. In fact, these two moral theories, in terms of just pure moral theories, still dominate all standard philosophical discussion. Now, it's clear to me that one of them is more interesting than the other. I think you know which one's more interesting to me. But I've got to warn you that there are knockdown objections to both. And by knockdown objections, I mean knockdown objections. We know that these theories are wrong because they're knockdown objections to them. The best way to look at both of them, however, might be as models of moral action. If by models we don't mean this shopping mart idea of something we do once in a while, but as a way to think about a moral life, if you're interested in it. Some people aren't interested in it, but if you are, it's a way to think about it. Well, but the objections are important to see. The classic objection to Kant's categorical imperative is that it is empty of content, period, because it depends on what someone's willing to will. So, if you ask Charlie Manson, Charlie, you know who Charlie Manson is? Charlie, are you willing to will your actions to be universal? What gives us a good reason to think Charlie Manson won't go? Why not? I'm the meanest SB in the valley. You see, at the bottom line, all Kant could say to him is, well, you're just not a rational moral agent, which isn't much of an answer to Manson now, is it? You see, the problem that is paid for making your moral theories universal at that level is you lose content. But now the utilitarian principle also has a deep problem that I have to mention. Very unfortunate problems with it. One of them being that it seems to violate our sense of justice. I'll use one example here. We have a device that will allow us to execute someone on television the way Attorney General Maddox in Texas wanted to do it, to scare people. But only Maddox and one scientist know that the device actually blows the prisoner, atomizes him, and sends him away to the Blessed Isles. Now, here's the other device, which is the normal Texas electric chair. Now, both of them have, by my example, the same effect on the public in terms of utility. They reduce crime, thus making for greater happiness for more people. But which one should the utilitarian prefer? The one that actually executes the prisoner, or the one that blows him to the Blessed Isles, by utilitarian principles? Yes or no's are okay.
Blessed Isles.
The Blessed Isles. But that doesn't seem fair now, does it? Why should he get to go to the Blessed Isles just because of this blessed principle? You see, you want to say, Blessed Isles or no Blessed Isles, happiness or no unhappiness. That isn't fair. So fairness is the thing that Kantian ethics seems to capture better. But utilitarian ethics seems to capture content and real decision-making frequently better than Kant's ethics. So they both have strong points and weak points. And that's important to remember. There's another really bad thing about utilitarian ethics taken too seriously. By that I mean taken as more than a model of moral reasoning. Say your kid's got an IQ of 110 and is lazy. You love him, though. Neighbor's kid's got an IQ 140, busy, he's got a Gilbert chemistry set as big as the wall, and you've got only enough money to send one kid to medical school, and you are a convinced utilitarian. Whose kid you going to send? Neighbor's kid. Some people wouldn't think that was moral, though. Why? Well, because both these moral theories, it's important to remind you now, ignore so much of our lives. Things like friends, family, special relations, ethnic relations, gender relations, class relations. Why are all those things ignored? Well, because they're bourgeois moral theories. That's why, among other things, among other reasons, that's why they're ignored. Anyway, that's, to this day, the two primary moral theories, utilitarian principle, the utilitarian theory, and Kant's. By the way, the utilitarian theory has wide applications besides philosophy. When you hear these economists on Nightline, be sure and remember, they're all working with utility-based models, but the foundations underneath those models are quite shaky. I'll give you one last moral example during the next talk before we get on to it. I think that's time to wrap up this one, isn't it? I think.